Hello, and welcome to What We've Learned. Again, it's myself, Steve, and it's Shane. And as ever, we've wrapped in a brilliant guest for you. And we're talking big this week, Shane, aren't we? We're talking the big four. We're talking big data, lateral thinking. We're talking with a man who heralds from a country where you might go on safari to see the big five. What's the plan, Shane? Who have we got, and why are we so excited?
Very excited indeed. Yes, we've got Herman Heyns joining us this week, and he's now Chief Executive Officer at Anmut, a business he founded. But his career, absolutely, as you say, partner at EY, KPMG, Accenture, and Deloitte. So he ticked them all off. I haven't asked Herman whether he's also ticked off the big five on Safari, but I have.
Me too. If we're playing that game of bingo, but I think Herman still beats us. The big four, tick, 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 tick. Yeah, and that leads him on well to the position of his career to date, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And I'm really excited to hear very much sort of somebody who's working day in, day out with huge organisations on big topics, and the biggest of all, treating data as an asset.
Amazing. So lots of big, lots and lots. And Anmut, if you don't know the name, literally by what it means and what they do, you certainly will by listening in to Herman and this fascinating conversation.
Morning, Herman. Really lovely that you can join us on this podcast, and
Morning,
a big welcome. So perhaps you could tell everybody about Anmut and what being CEO of a startup I think you founded in 2018 means for you, and a day in the life of Herman, if you like.
Great. Well, Shane, thanks for inviting me, and Steve, really, really good to be here. So yes, you're right. I started Anmut in 2018. The reason I started it was actually a bizarre thing. I was leading the data analytics practice at EY, and I had a big back surgery. And as you have time to reflect and think over the 6 weeks of recovery, I realized that there's a space in the market that nobody's really addressing. And it was just so obvious to me. Because if you think about the way the data market is structured, the vast majority of spend is in the area of analytics, as well as the storage and manipulation of data. But actually, if you look at successful companies in any industry, I mean, let's take a simple one like the oil, not a simple one, oil industry is quite complex, but they have sort of a few main things happening in the industry. The one is that the most valuable thing is finding the oil, and then the second most important thing is extracting it. Then you have the storage and the distribution and use of it. And it was clear to me that in the data space there is very little experience and science behind finding the right data to ensure that you can execute your strategy, and secondly, ensuring that it is extracted and put into the right shape for people to use. So that's really where Anmut focuses. We do have the other data science skills, as you can imagine, but we really focus on those first two. When I started the business, people said you're absolutely mad, which I probably am. But it was really good to see the market responding to what we're doing. We very fortunate. We have 5 quite significant clients now, and we are even ahead of the plan of where we wanted to be. So that's really about Anmut. We have a fantastic team. We're close on 30 people now, and growing very rapidly, continue to grow in the range of 200 to 300% a year. So anything in that range, we're very happy, and we feel we're on plan.
And Herman, we've self-declared, we've got a madman with a bad back who's come up with this great idea. The clients you've got and how they've become clients. I just wonder for anyone, were there triggers? Were they all 5 in a place of peril? What are the indicators, or how easy is it to sell in this to organizations? Do they need to be in a certain place? Do you turn on lights for them that they didn't realize were there? Is it, as I said, a case of they're in some kind of turmoil or turnaround that makes it easier for them to perhaps see this?
It really is a fantastic question, probably one of the most fundamental questions we explore every day, is to really understand what type of clients respond to what we do, and what are the things that make them interested in what we do. So I'd say there's probably three groupings of clients that we identify. There is the grouping of clients that are absolutely leading edge in what they do. So the concept of placing a real quantifiable value on your data and being able to understand how your data is the avatar of the health of the organization and the value of the organization. There are those clients that really get that and understand, if you want to create exponential value, you need to understand that. So I'd say that's the first group of companies or clients. And then the second group are the ones that realize that they spend a fortune on data management in the organization analytics. The average company typically spends around 5% of their revenue on data related things without realizing it. If you ask most organizations, do they know how much they spend on data? They actually have no clue. And they recognize that data is valuable, but what they want to do is to rationalize their investments into the things that would give them the best return. So I think there are those clients that we see are clearly ones that benefit from our services, because that what we do in essence is to help them prioritize those kind of investments. But I think there's a third grouping of clients that recognize that they need to understand what data assets they need in order to execute their strategy. And they've got a complete misalignment between those two. So we help them understand which data assets they will need in order to really execute their strategy. And we've got, they are organizations of very different sizes and scales. We've got one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies as a client. We have a very, very large infrastructure company that spends in the range of about £6 billion a year on infrastructure management. And we also have some very high-tech biotech companies, as well as fintech companies who really need to understand what the absolute critical data assets are that they need to own.
So that's fascinating, Herman, in terms of that categorization, if you like, of a need, and very clear, leading edge or data management, analytics, or data assets for strategy. Do you think that...
sorry, Siri's just picked up on the background here, so let me just try and switch that.
So Siri is joining. I'd be very interested to know Siri's opinion on whether we've missed a group there. I think
I'm disappointed that we've not thought of that as an audience as well, Shane. We thought we just had mostly marketing and business professionals, but we have Siri and maybe who knows who else listening in. So that's good to know, Herman, that you've already provoked some people to want to know more.
I do apologise.
No, that's not a problem at all. And actually, I think that's brilliant and appropriate for the world of data today and the different ways it's being collected. But go back to the point about the three different segments. Do you feel, that the time is now for organisations to think of treating data as an asset? If you like, it's almost the perfect storm this year that everybody's re-looking at the way we do business. Do you feel that's been an extra, if you like, impetus to the growth, amazing growth of 300% of Anmut?
I think yes. If we look at how the COVID pandemic is being handled by different countries, for me, there's a very clear delineation between the countries that actually have the data, trust the data for the decision making, and execute accordingly. And clearly those countries have, and if you were to set a measure of what would be a successful country, I would argue it would be a country that has been able to manage the health impact so that it's minimum, as well as the economic impact, that it has the least impact on and if you have that sweet spot between the two, you've actually got the right answer. Now, clearly, there are countries that we can all recognise that are in that category, and then you've got countries that really aren't. They don't have the data they need. They're not using the data appropriately. They're not taking the right decisions, and they are in a horrible situation where you've got very high death tolls and significant economic damage being done to the countries. So I can see that different countries are clearly moving very rapidly to understanding how they need to look after their data assets. The UK government recognizing the situation it's in, that they aren't in a position they need to be with their data, have launched the national data strategy, which hopefully will be a wake-up call for our country to start taking data seriously. We have enormous depth and talent in terms of data. And I think it's time that we start using our strength in that space to execute on that. So I think from a UK perspective, I can see we're not in a good place, but I think we absolutely can get there. The signs are encouraging. And also what's quite interesting is that you've got philosophical differences between regions. If you look at the US, data effectively in many cases is owned by the big corporates. Europe, including the UK at the moment, has a more view that it's the person or the individual that should have more rights around the data. And then you've got Asia, which has a view of it, the state has the power around data. And those philosophies will play out in different ways. So it's going to be very interesting how it all plays out. But then from a corporate perspective, if we look at, and I include government organizations in that view, I can see that a lot of organizations are going to be under significant economic pressure in the next few years globally. And the question is, which asset can you deploy to give yourself a strategic advantage? Which unexplored asset can you use? And because only about 3% of the world's organizations use data as a strategic asset, there is an enormous opportunity for companies and government organizations to make a difference there. So that's our view, and we can see the market is moving in the right direction for us and for people of similar thinking as us.
It's really interesting. It takes you back to the start, Herman, with that oil example of countries and companies, dare I say it, that are sitting on this kind of valuable asset, whether it's a raw material like oil. It's countries that recognize it and are looking for it, and then how can they make value of it, versus countries that find it by chance, and again, that for companies as well, or companies that don't even start looking for it. There must be a cultural element to this as well, that it's, and for me as a digital marketeer, data is something that I very quickly saw the value of, because I cannot do what I need to do as an output if I haven't got the right input. But I wonder what you think about whether there still is this almost a PR exercise to get countries, companies thinking more about the very lateral value of data, rather than just, and as Shane and I would say, as you see companies that just got big databases, they think they're just outputting without realizing, if you haven't got the input right, haven't got that raw ingredients in, you just are never going to be able to open up the opportunities to turn on the lights, to find strategic advantages, whatever your goal is, without really having that true appreciation of what data means.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, the understanding of what we would call the data asset is extremely low. The awareness level, most organizations are in a stage where they are very, it's like the early stage of motoring and fuel. If you think about it, what you had was the Wild West of the oil industry, and there was no standardization for interchange. So if you wanted, your car manufacturer would say you needed to buy fuel from Phillips Petroleum or whatever because it had a certain formulation and mixture. You wouldn't put something else in because it wasn't standardized. Now, clearly that's standardized over time. We are still in that very early stage of understanding the value of the data as oil. And clearly the organizations that get it are placing their bets wisely. What we still see is the very early stage where the average CEO and CFO is still sort of doing a shotgun approach and allowing technologists to make decisions about what is possible for their skill set. So in other words, they allow lots of analytics to happen based on what people are capable of, rather than saying we need to be strategic or saying this is what we need to enable our strategy. I mean, Amazon is a brilliant example of once Jeff Bezos realized that they need to be able to collect information, just like the Siri snippet that we just had, Alexa was born because that is a data gathering vehicle of absolute, tremendous proportion. And the Alexa as a speaker is not the product. Alexa as a data gathering tool is really what it's about, because that data asset that they are building allows them to improve their logistics and demand planning by percentages. And those percentages at the scale for Amazon is significantly more than the cost of collecting the data. So that is strategic thinking about your data asset, understanding that fundamentally what you're trying to build are data assets that give you a strategic advantage for the organization. And that's sort of how we view it. And it's not black magic, but it does require a different kind of thinking about what assets you have to play with.
That's really interesting, and I think for many, it's easy to see the big technology companies doing it, and we all understand we are the product. That's what they're selling. They're selling us the data and what we're buying. But for me, I think because we've got so many advances in technology in so many fronts, there are more interesting areas perhaps for more traditional businesses like the Internet of Things, collecting data through tyres, through vehicles, and how a car manufacturer may become something completely different. Is that sort of what you're alluding to there, Herman, in terms of saying, driving strategy and thinking about your business differently?
Absolutely, Shane. So one of our clients is a global medical devices organization, and they are in a very early stage of moving up their data maturity. So they would probably be classified in what we would call stage 2, maybe stage 2.5 of data maturity. And what that means is that they're spending money on data, but not necessarily getting much of a return on it. And they have significant data quality issues. I don't want to say too much, but their expectation was, for example, their customer database would be at least 50-60% good shape, as most organizations think. It was actually 6% of what they needed to run the business. So the reality is that a lot of organizations don't realize what poor condition their data assets are in. But then the next thing they try and do is to fix it through sort of technology interventions like buying an MDM tool, et cetera, which is a shotgun approach. There are data assets that you absolutely need you need to be really, really clear which are the ones that will give you the best return on your investment, and really focus on getting those right. But where they are going strategically is really why we are engaging with them. Is they recognize the future of healthcare is going to be a blend of the physical device as well as the information device. So think about it. If you have a hip replacement and the orthopedic device that gets implanted can actually monitor what movement you're making and what kind of physio treatment would best help you to recover in half the time and get a better outcome. You save money for the health system, you save people being time off work, etc., etc. So the benefits are enormous. However, it will only be companies that can understand that that data asset needs to be built now in order to have the benefit in 4 or 5 years' time when the product hits the market. So the challenge is we still see, as I say, 97% of organizations who don't think of their data assets in the same way that the tech companies do. If you have a new product coming online, what are the data implications and what do you need to make as an investment? And how are you going to gather that data to ensure that you can create those better outcomes? So in this case, for healthcare, reduce the cost of healthcare. You can price more aggressively for your product because you're providing better outcomes for the patient, for the healthcare system, for the insurer, etc., etc., etc. It's just all round better if you use data wisely and in a beneficial way for everybody.
And Herman, that sounds a bit like your I know your background's accountancy, amongst other things, is that recognizing of not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but that particular point there, that I'm sure the ability to calculate the investment versus return on implementing that data-led approach. Again, it's turning on the lights of realization for the modern board or CEO at any level of organization, is don't see this data thing as a cost, and don't see it as just a cost of doing business. See it as the opportunity of lateral opportunities that this can suddenly allow for, or perhaps retrospectively can prove that, look, we've been doing this for a long time, but here's the evidence. The data says these are the savings, these are the opportunities, the advantage, whatever it is they might be looking for.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the most difficult thing about strategy is not deciding to do something, it's deciding what you're not going to do. And being able to have the better decision mechanisms around that is incredibly valuable. So what we are seeing, to sort of round back to the original question, we are seeing the next, let's call it 15% of organizations that are getting ready to take advantage of being data. I don't really like the word data driven, because you should be really driven by your stakeholders of the organization. You should be led by what your stakeholders, your customers, your employees, the environment, and so on requires of you to be a successful organization. And the data is an enabler, but a very powerful enabler.
So on that, I love the point, and you were honest enough when we were chatting just beforehand to say that you've made lots of learnings from your failures as you've gone through your career. I love the point you make there about learning about what you're not going to do is as much as important for your strategy. So how have you deployed that, Herman, at Anmut? Because going, I would imagine, from being a partner from one of the big four and working in a very large organization to starting up literally with, one or two of you, what's been the biggest challenge for you to learn what not to do as you grow your business now?
Oh, what a good question, a difficult one to answer. People who know me know that I think deeply, and I try to learn from really smart people. So Buddha said, just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again. And I think that's true in life. We are not our past. We are what we aspire to be for ourselves and for the environment and for the people around us. And I think one of the big things I had to learn is that if you do make mistakes, you do need to move on from them, but learn from them. As they say, donkey doesn't bump its head twice, but you do need to kind of learn from those. And I would say, what are some of the big mistakes that I've made in life? there was a stage where I was too enthusiastic and didn't realize that you need to get people to move along with you in order to achieve what you need to do. There were stages in my career where I was probably too deferential to people in who more senior to me. So one of the learnings that I have implemented in Anmut is to say, your position doesn't matter. Everybody has an equal say in terms of the direction that we're going, but ultimately the accountability for the organization's direction is mine. So I do want to hear from everybody. We are incredibly lucky to have really, really talented people. As Steve Jobs said, his job is to find the smartest people and give them a clear vision and direction, then get out of the way. I'm not as good as Steve Jobs was, but I think there is a lot to be learned from that philosophy rather than trying to micromanage everything. And I often fall into that trap over and over again. But as Buddha said, you need to shed your skin over and over again. We have some ingrained habits and things which we need to recognize they are part of us. We all have certain personalities, and one of the things we do at Anmut is we ask everybody to do a personality test, not to pigeonhole them, but for us to understand what are the different strengths and weaknesses that we can all bring to the table. I wouldn't say I'm a great salesperson, but what I'm really, really good at is being a good architect and solutioning the right thing. So in the sales process, there is a space for that. And what we try and do is to have different people with different strengths do a proper handover. And we get better and better at that. But the only thing is we can learn from that. Probably the biggest learning I've had in life is, and this is life in general, is to be gracious. If I reflect back on the many, many times that people have been gracious to me undeservingly, really, really undeservingly. When I was young, I was quite outspoken about what I thought and believed, and I probably did rub people up the wrong way. But there were people that were kind enough to stick around and kind of believe in me and give me the space to operate. And I think that's grace, So what we try and do, and as you might know, means grace and elegance. So we try and pay forward grace in the way we work. And the second thing is the other part of the name means elegance. We don't think the way a lot of business is being done is clearly thought through enough. And it's often in pursuit of a short-term profit. So what we try and do is to say, how do you balance the challenge between a short-term profit and being able to operate for the long term? If you think F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, wrote a book about personal failure, and he said, intelligence is measured by a person's ability to see the validity within both sides of contradicting arguments. I think that's the reality of life. There is a duality, or even more than that, to a lot of things we do, and it's that balance between the short term versus the long term that actually allows us to balance doing the right thing for people. That's quite a mouthful. I'll pause there.
That's really interesting, Herman. I think it's funny, actually, you won't know this, but there's a clear thread from what you've described from other people we've spoken with that have had, similarly successful careers, is that ability to recognize and see the value of mistakes, if you will, that, they're just another step in the right direction, or they arm you with something down the line that you may not know at the time that will help. And then having literally the good grace to allow to share that. And it's a quote, I don't know where it comes from. I may have even made it up, but I really like the idea of the experience is not a monopoly on good ideas. that enabling people that you work with that don't feel intimidated by, well, he's been around a lot longer than me, she's been around, that anybody can have a good idea or come up with a eureka moment if the right environment's for them. And then having that leader of the pack, yourself in this case, to sense check and politely say, well, let's stimulate ideas and suggestions, but somebody ultimately is accountable for that direction. I think it's really, really positive. I just want to come back to that last point around that short term versus long term. And I wonder whether this year, so we're at the back end of 2020 as we speak, and COVID-19 and all that's brought, do you think that's opened corporates' minds? Has it changed for good or bad that balance of doing the right thing, making money now versus doing that longer term right thing? Are we in a better place because of COVID because of that, or is it far, far worse, far harder for us to see that polarity?
It's on the surface, I think it's creating the opportunity to think more in a more balanced way. So I don't know if you're aware, but I led a very important initiative for EY called Long-Term Value, which became something called the Embankment Project, or EPIC. And what it was about was how do we look at the investment chain to help the CEOs of big corporates make more balanced decisions between the long term and the short term. Currently, except if you look at sort of the Silicon Valley organizations, the vast majority of CEOs feel under enormous pressure to optimize for the short term. And to give you an example, one of the CEOs that I know, who was the CEO at that stage of one of the world's largest pharma companies, said to me, Herman, the challenge I have is I'm being measured on a quarterly basis, but I'm actually making investments that will only realize in 30 years from now. So the market isn't tuned, and I don't have the language to explain to the market how these very long-term decisions that we're taking will actually make the world a better place or not. So we created the Long-Term Value Project to help change the scorecard for organizations. And if you think about who sets the scorecards for the CEO, it's the fund managers, and then ultimately the biggest scorecard setters could be the pension funds. But the pension funds didn't realize they have that power. And the fund managers didn't realize they have that power to set better scorecards for the CEOs of organizations. And it's only once people like Larry Fink from BlackRock, Peter Harrison from Schroders and so on started to get on board, and that we were able to get Hiro Mizui from the Japan Pension Fund, etc., engaged in this. Paul Polman was involved in this, and so on and so forth. To realize that we can set better scorecards for the big corporates, and that will start to drive better outcomes. And what we say is a better outcome is being clear about who your stakeholders are. Stakeholders being customers, the employees, suppliers, the environment, and so on, and understanding how you balance the short term versus the long term. And there have been some brilliant things happening this year. I mean, if you look at Bernard Looney, the CEO of BP, the announcements they've made to think much more long term in terms of the direction they're taking with the environmental impact that they have. Shell has made similar announcements, etc. So I think we're starting to see that change happening. That's sort of context part one. The second part of it is that we are in a change over from superpowers. We've had the US as the big superpower for most of our generation, and it is changing over to China. That's not disputable. All the signals indicate that. If we think smartly about what data and measures could really create better outcomes for the world, now is the time to start moving on those, because it's in this transition period that there's fertile soil before it becomes embedded in the structures of a new superpower. So we think, as you can imagine, and we think big. We dream big because we think it is possible. We don't believe that you have to accept the world as it is. You have to be realistic, but you have to take responsibility for making this a better place.
I mean, I think that's going to cause a real sort of wake-up moment for many of our listeners and resonate in so many ways, because I know Steve and I come across this the whole time. We're in a much more smaller context. We're working with CMOs who have this battle because marketing is normally about a longer term growth than short term sales. But even though our horizon might not be 30 years, it might be saying, well, investing now in your brand or your marketing strategy is going to pay back in 3 years. And you have a board who's saying, but I want my quarterly sales now. I want to put the money in marketing to short-termism. And I absolutely know that real friction between short-term and long-term investment is a pain point for all our listeners. So how can we make, if you like, the baby steps towards bringing in this longer-term thinking, which I completely agree with you is better for the health of the bigger economies of the world, but also for our businesses and our stakeholders? How do we start, Herman?
It's a great question, and the way we decode value for the data valuation process allows organizations to understand what the value pathways are and to explain to not only the board, but to the investment community why focusing on certain areas of value will really create those outcomes. And bizarrely, it then marries up your short-term and your long-term decision-making. Because if you truly can articulate how what you're doing creates value, you can create value in the short and long term. But what it requires is a real focus on where you are placing those investments. One of the big challenges, and Shane, you'll know that I'm not a natural marketer, but one of the big challenges that I struggled with in the early days of Anmut was trying to understand what a lot of people from a marketing background was telling me, how that supports the value agenda. Because I think there is an enormous amount of understanding in the marketing space around the things that need to be done to create marketing value. However, if you look at me as a test case, I'm more akin to, well, I'm obviously a CEO now, but not of a very large organization, but think of me more as the CFO of a larger organization. I need to be able to understand what trade-offs I need to make with all the other investments that I need to make across the organization. And the vast majority of competing investments that people bring to me have very clear payback plans, return on investment plans. With a lot of the marketing plans, they are not always as clear. I think that the most successful marketers are able to articulate the creativity of the marketing job into a return on investment. And I think, data is critical. That is the common thread there, because understanding, having quality insight into your customer helps with the short term around your sales process. It helps in large organizations with reducing your working capital, the number of days outstanding. So those are things CFOs would understand. But actually having the quality of data in your understanding of the customer then really helps you to execute on the longer term as well. So these things aren't mutually exclusive. It's just understanding that a data asset has many use cases, and being able to say we need to fix the data asset, but then ensure that we have short and longer term plans to extract value from it.
It's also, I think, it pulls back to a couple of threads we've had with previous guests, Herman, is being able to talk the right language. And this is a classic sin of marketing, and possibly other disciplines as well, is that if you take that CFO hat you're wearing I may come to you with some kind of investment case for, and I think, Shane, I don't know what you think, but the classic is marketing technology at the moment is just buying for the sake of, or everyone else seems to be buying it without having done the work to understand that the cost versus return, and then articulate it in a way that the CFO can understand. It's their language rather than just marketing speak for what seems a sexy thing. People like
and to that,
sexy,
yeah, and to
as
that
long as
point,
it makes
Steve, actually
money.
not investing in or putting in the investment case, and I think this is something that Herman mentions in a report, not investing in data and training as well as the technology, and that's a constant fail that we've seen CMOs make.
Yeah, I think so. It's almost the analogy, I guess, is back to our fuel again, is you can buy itself a piece the business might invest in a piece of technology, buy you a car, but if you can't afford, you haven't worked out how much it's going to cost to put the fuel into it, you haven't got a sat nav, you haven't got direction, you haven't even got insurance, you've got a very powerful thing with an incredibly inexperienced or poor driver that's just going to make a mess of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. As you can imagine, one of the things we see a lot of are digital initiatives, and those are often very closely, in many organizations, the CMO and digital head of digital is very much the same person or very closely aligned. The success rate of digital initiatives is actually very low. It's between whether you trust McKinsey or Deloitte or whatever, the figures are in the range between 6 and 30% successful achievement of the business plan. And one of the main reasons, there are two main reasons. The one is that obviously the data isn't where it needs to be, so people haven't made the investment in the data. But the second one, which is actually more aligned to that than people realize, is the organization isn't aligned to execute in this new digital way. Now, if you think about it, if you understood how the value flows through the organization to enable the new digital way, you would think about what different scorecards we need for the organization. And you have to stop some stuff while starting some other things. So understanding the value flows and how that changes the scorecards of different people in the organization is critical. And you would say, well, what's the link to data? Well, data is the avatar of value in the organization. And if you understand how the value lands up in your data, you also understand what the performance measures need to be around that. So, I think I do urge all of our clients to say, when you have a large digital or big systems initiative, MarTech or whatever, if you haven't considered the data, you're already doomed, because your project will be late and you will overrun significantly. And in many of those cases, the projects eventually gets canned, and it further destroys the credibility of those areas. So and it's not impossible to sync up your data improvement plan with those initiatives. But if you don't start off with thinking of the value first and then what enables. So if you think about, in the old days, we used to talk about people, process, and technology that enables value. Well, actually, we now know that data adds to that. So you need to consider data, people, process, and technology, and then you've got a fair chance.
So Herman, you mentioned people there, and I know that Anmut have just produced a really interesting research report, the 2020 Data Leadership Report, which I was lucky enough to have a preview read of, and it's just been published. And in that, there's a really interesting quote, which I was just fascinated to hear why. What lay behind this, really, which is is it better to bend the people to fit the data, or is it better to bend the data to fit the people? So talking about people, that's obviously a core part of what you look at, but why is that in that report, that sort of philosophical question?
I'm so glad you picked up on that. So I think we would all agree that one thing we all understand is pounds and pence, or dollars and cents. And up to now, if you try to talk to a board about data and the investments that needed to be made, you would typically have a conversation such as, our master data is in poor shape, we need to buy Informatica 360, and it will cost X million, and then we'll have some improvement. Now you can imagine most board members sitting there and saying, well, yeah, I don't know. However, if you went to the board and said, our customer data set is worth £2 billion. We currently have it in the shape of 15% fit for purpose. If we can improve it to a 60% fitness for purpose, we can improve our margin by 20, and we can reduce our cost by 10% of customer acquisition. But we will need to make that investment in improving our data. That's a very different discussion. It is basically the same thing that the chief data officer or the CIO is saying, but it's translated into people language. And that's really what we try and say, is that yes, the technology is really, really important. All the tools that have been developed are critical, but we all need to speak one language, and the one language I think we can all understand is the stuff that we've been measured on for the past 100 years, and that's how companies run. It's about the value and the financials. So let's translate these big questions into things that people understand. And it's surprising how once we've done that for organization, it does change everything, not just the data discussion. One of our clients who's big in infrastructure basically said, for the first time, I can now compare £1 that I invest in physical infrastructure, in tarmac, versus £1 in data, and I can clearly see the data will give me a better return. It's that simple. But up to now, until we started Anmut, people didn't have that language. So that's why we've created the language of data value. And it helps to make it understandable for ordinary people.
Value of language data. Brilliant, Herman. Look, I think that's so fascinating on all that you've said. And I just, on behalf of Shane and I and everyone listening in, including Siri, your good friend, just an enormous thanks. That was incredibly helpful for us. Shane, I hope as enjoyable for me as it was for you.
Thought-provoking. I could go on for ages, because I've written down so much that I want to come back to, and will do, because that's always the pleasure of having great guests. Thank you, Herman, so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I loved it. Thank you very much.
Well, we promised big talk, and we certainly had it. Fascinating stuff there from Herman. So much to pick up on, Shane. Just to quickly, actually, to start with, perhaps, he mentioned, amongst lots of other great things, the UK National Data Strategy. For those that aren't familiar, what do we know about that?
So the National Data Strategy is described on the government's own website as an ambitious pro-growth strategy that drives the UK in building a world-leading data economy, while ensuring public trust in data use. Very interesting, that last bit, that they understand, and Herman mentioned it, about this different philosophical approach to data worldwide, with the US being very much being owned by the corporate, Europe very much around the rights of the individual, and then lastly, Asia, and particularly China, well, the state owns everything. So, obviously the UK government's trying to balance that we need to grow our economy using data, whilst maintaining trust. So, I'd urge everybody to have a read of it, because I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a good word there, trust, as well, I think, because what Herman made a great case for, we started with oil, is that, the analogy of knowing where to go and find that valuable resource, that data, knowing how to go and collect and use it, and then how to make the most of it commercially. That's not necessarily new practice, but I think initiatives like this UK-wide one will help just awaken more and more organisations and boards to thinking differently, perhaps even thinking bigger about data, Shane, for sure, as Herman's really nicely articulated. I think then you've got that other side to always balance, is that trust. Because it feels a lot for me, the world that we're in is, rather than going mining for big reservoirs of value, it's very fractional, so much data in so many different places. And companies have therefore got to think really hard about wide gathering of data, literally from the pockets of perhaps its customers, its consumers, and bringing that all together into one coherent piece that allows the future in terms of how you, as I said, collect it, use it, and gain value from it.
Absolutely. And as you say, I think, it's understanding. And again, it's really interesting, the wording that's used on the National Data Strategy, and they actually reference the requirement in the global recovery from the COVID crisis says that we must draw on the UK's long championed values of transparency, accountability and inclusion, and the sharing of best practice will be more vital than ever to ensure that data underpins our resilience and economic prosperity through the crisis and beyond. And I think those words of transparency, accountability and inclusion are ones we in the commercial sector are really grappling with. And I agree with you that Herman's, really important work in speaking the language of your stakeholders goes to the heart of this. Great advice.
Yeah, really good, Shane. Absolutely. And if you need a bit of help with understanding how to speak that language, then lots of resources, as you said, the UK National Data Strategy might be an interesting read, but that data leadership as a report as well, you can find that, I'm sure, or certainly parts of it, at least on Anmut's website, which is anmut.co.uk. So a big thanks again to Herman, and as ever, thanks to Shane. Thank you, listener, dear listener. If you want another website address for your collection, then www.podcast.co.uk. You may have some questions, some comments on this, particularly interested in terms of where you and your organisation may see that maturity and that understanding of the value of data. So please do go there. That will take you through to our LinkedIn discussion page. And if that's not enough for you, it'll also get you back to pretty much every episode we've ever published to date. So if you've got time on your hands and want to go and delve a bit deeper into the back catalogue, go do so there. Otherwise, well, we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, everybody.